Thank you very much. Am I loud enough here? Thanks everyone for coming. I really appreciate it on a Saturday afternoon. I know you probably have many other things to do. Thanks to everybody at the Owens who's been amazing. Thanks to Lucy for inviting me. Real and I were here 7 or 8 years ago. I was curating something for OK Kwa, and I completely, immediately fell in love with Sackville. And I was kind of wondering if a winter visit would break the spell, and thus far it has not. I'm still prepared to pack my belongings up and move here. I'm serious. I couldn't decide today if I wanted to talk about the content of Pop Quiz, which is questions, clearly, or about the format of the work and how it relates to other projects. And I figured that given that I wrote a little text for this booklet and Lucy wrote another and Jordy did a little interview with me, I decided to go with the latter. So my practice is sort of decidedly, as Lucy mentioned, not media specific. I've made films and videos and audio works and photography, some performance pieces. I've made the occasional drawing or silk screened work. I've made billboards and light boxes. I've made work in neon. I've made whiskey and LSD and CDs and DVDs and records. I won't normally go this fast. And several editioned works and multiples. And then countless bookworks. And the focus on books and records in my practice is not really incidental, but almost related to their status as a sort of delivery device for pop culture, which is a subject at the core of my practice. I think of my work as sort of largely about how pop culture is formed, how it functions, what we do with it, the way that it shapes our identities, it informs histories, et cetera, et cetera. There's a quote from the critic Dave Hickey, who I gather is a bit of a dick, but I quite like this. People don't make literature, architecture, and art. The culture makes those things. We make books, buildings, and objects. We do our crummy little shit, and the culture assigns value to it. So I've been interested in the sort of varieties of attempts to demystify that process, to deconstruct how culture is assigned, or how culture is created, how value is assigned. And as such, my work is sort of primarily about as I think Lucy mentioned, the sort of language and the syntax of cinema or pop songs, and investigation into various tropes and memes. So for example, my most recent work from late last year is called Watching Night of the Living Dead, and it's a response to a story of how a low-budget movie shot in Pittsburgh 50 years ago went on to become one of the most successful and influential independent films of all time. So the zombie classic Night of the Living Dead was originally called Night of the Flesh Eaters, but the title was changed at the very last minute at the urging of the distributors. And when this title card that we see here was removed and replaced, or when this one replaced the previous one, the copyright C symbol was accidentally omitted. And that wouldn't be a problem now because of the way the laws have changed, but at the time, if your project, your film, your book, your whatever did not have the copyright C on it, it immediately fell into the public domain and was not protected. So meaning that legally you were paid no royalties for your work, and that venues could present the film, like drive-in cinemas, later television, could present the film free of charge, which is obviously quite an incentive. So if you think of sort of copyright as ostensibly designed to protect content creators, here the lack of copyright is what led to, I would argue, the sustained career of the director George Romero, but also the birth of the zombie genre, which continues strongly today. And it also means that other filmmakers could use clips from the movie in their own movies or television shows, bypassing the cost and the bureaucratic headaches typically associated with licensing footage. So it became pretty common for anytime you would see a character watching something on television, they're probably watching something in the public domain, and it was often Night of the Living Dead. This is Gary Oldman as Sid Vicious, watching in hospital. So on television, in cinemas, at drive-ins, on cell phones. So I decided to see if I could retell the original movie entirely using scenes found in these other films. I'm often kind of looking for like masochistic lifelong projects that I could like start now and not finish until I'm near dead. And I thought this would be one of those undertakings, but it turns out that there was enough footage that I could essentially complete the piece in about 10 months. So the finished work, or rather the work as it stands now, because like Pop Quiz, it's probably not finished. I'll probably continue to add to it. It exists in a form in which it doesn't cut back to the original for more than 30 or 40 seconds. So I've got like pretty complete coverage of the film. Features clips from hundreds of shows dating as far back as 1981 and as recently as the day that it was last presented. So we had a screening in October, just before Halloween, and when I came home, I arrived home to a number of messages from people saying, I just watched the new Netflix series, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, and in the first minute of the pilot episode, the characters go to the cinema and watch Night of the Living Dead. So just a little taste. I've got, I don't know, maybe a 3-minute clip of the piece here.
Hey, come on, Barb. Church was this morning, huh? Hey, I mean, praying's for church, huh? Come on.
I haven't seen you in church lately.
Well, there's not much sense in my going to church. Do you remember one time when we were small, we were out here? It was from right over there. I jumped out at you from behind the tree, and Grandpa got all excited, and he shook his fist at me, and he said, "Boy, you be damned to hell." Remember that? Right over there. Well, you used to really be scared here.
Johnny.
You're still afraid.
Stop it now, I mean it.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it. You're ignorant.
They're coming for you, Barbara.
Stop it. You're acting like a child.
They're coming for you. Look, there comes one of them now.
He'll hear you.
Here he comes now. I'm getting out of here.
Johnny.
etc., etc. The project could be considered part of a genre I'm sure you've heard discussed before called the supercut, a term first coined about a decade ago, but that has been applied retroactively to works as old as Joseph Cornell's 1936 film Rose Hobart, in which the artist took the 1931 B-movie East of Borneo and edited out all of the scenes that didn't include actress Rose Hobart. When he screened the 19-minute film, Salvador Dali, who was in the room, was said to have knocked over the projector in a fit of rage, shouting that he had had the idea first and that Cornell had stolen it from his subconscious. Decades later, Candace Breitz would perfect the approach with a series called Soliloquy, featuring movies starring Sharon Stone, Jack Nicholson, and Clint Eastwood, with all but the lead character's speaking parts removed, reducing the original films down to about 10 minutes on average. You can find them on her pretty new Vimeo page. Bruce Conner's A Movie from 1958 is considered a landmark of the found footage genre, but the term is mostly applied to sort of quickly made fan projects edited in iMovie that identify a cliche and find repeated examples, such as every time the phrase kind of or some kind of appears in Star Trek, or every time Denzel Washington is ever clapped in a movie. And my a recent favorite, every time Shelley Duvall says, "Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall," which I can't recommend highly enough. I'm not a huge fan of the term supercut. To me, it sort of evokes discount haircuts. But sort of like the word mashup for music, it seems to be the term that is struck. I kind of like VC archaeology, which I feel emphasizes the dig and the research aspect of these sort of accumulative projects, and the idea of using cinema as a practical archive. About a decade ago, Kelly Mark and I, an artist whose work I think is shown here before, were collaborating on a project in which we hope to collect every single minute of the day from clocks and television including clocks in television shows and movies, which is 1,440 in total, only to have Christian Marclay announce his project, The Clock, when we were 84.6% of the way through the work, which I know because I kept a daily tally of how far along we were in the 2 years that we spent working on it. And then Marclay released his piece to like wide, enormous acclaim, and we sort of had to bow out. But we finished the piece anyway out of some like absurd, crazy compulsion, and spent about 10,000 hours in total making a piece that we will lock away and never show anyone. As a kind of a fuck you to Christian Marclay, whom I love, I made this follow-up piece called Timeline. And like Pop Quiz, it's expanded each time that it's screened. So I think the first time it showed at Nuit Blanche, and it was 60 minutes long. And then it added 10 minutes a year later when it showed in Halifax as part of Nocturne. And then another 20 minutes was added when it was part of the Montreal Biennale a couple years after that. And then the last time it screened, I think about a year and a half ago, it was now over 2 hours long. And the piece consists of establishing shots from period piece films primarily, which include date captions and often location information, so it becomes a kind of global history mediated through cinema. It begins 19,000 years ago and then moves forward through time. Travels through most significant parts of history. It includes every year from the 18th and 19th century and 20th century, I think. I think there's 300 years sequentially that doesn't miss a year. And then after that, it moves into the 21st century. Up until present date, and then after that point, it switches over into science fiction films and accounts for another 800 years or so. I think it encompasses almost 20,000 years in total. And it was Kelly who noticed earlier this year, she remarked that she felt that much of my work could be viewed as a supercut, even if it didn't take the form of a video. So the end result might be a series of photographs or a silkscreen. but that the approach is still kind of aligned with the ultimate premise of the collection of the supercut. This photograph, for example, is not dissimilar to Timeline. The work collects books titled The Last 1,000 Years, The Last 100 Years, The Last 50 Years, 10 Years Ago, etc. And then in the center point, moves from history books to speculative fiction or science books with titles like The Next 2 Years, The Next 10 Years, The Next 20 Years, 50 Years from Now, and so on. And the book begins and ends with billion, so the library effectively represents 2 billion years, one past, one present. Except some of the books predicting the future in 50 years' time were actually published 60, 70, 80 years ago, so the timeline gets a bit muddied. And none of the titles mention actual dates. The date is always measured from the present. This bookshelf piece tells a sort of abstracted history of punk rock with biographies of predecessors to the scene, as outlined by critic Lester Bangs, who traced the movement back to Lady Godiva, almost 1,000 years previous. The phone on this back wall is a collaboration with Stephanie Cormier and is kind of an audio work as cinema supercut. It consists entirely of phone conversations from movies and television where the characters are talking on the phone. But more specifically, it's characters who are being wiretapped or who think they are, or listened in on, or who think they are. It's about 90 minutes long as well. I'm really kind of drawn to the feature length. There's a lot of paranoia, some founded, some unfounded, strained conversations, stilted dialogue, things like, I can't talk now, but meet me at the place. And the visuals are removed, so it sort of takes cinema as just an audio archive. And what happens is that when you're standing in the gallery, and you hold the receiver to your ear, you kind of become complicit in the surveillance. The viewer, or listener, I suppose, fulfills the role of the wiretapper or eavesdropper. Ideally, I'd like to do it as a public artwork, because it could be done like really cheaply, like a couple $1,000s probably, which is cheap by public art standards. Just need to find an old phone booth and repurpose it with an MP3 player wired into the receiver. The work was part of a show that also featured this project called Ear Long Done Do Does Did, a kind of bookwork as mashup. It's a 128-page book featuring pages out of other books, all of which contain a source lyric for a song by Morrissey or the Smiths. Titles include memoirs, prose, plays, true crime books, literature, poetry, film criticism, and other titles where singer and lyricist Morrissey saw a turn of phrase that he couldn't resist stealing. So it's kind of a plagiarized book about plagiarism, or a very disjointed example of cut-up poetry. And the title comes from Cemetery Gates, a song on the Smiths' 1986 LP, The Queen is Dead, which features the lyric, "You say, Erlong done do does did, words which could only be your own, and then produce the text from whence was ripped some dizzy whore 1804. The song cites Oscar Wilde as a kind of patron saint of plagiarism, and his famous quote on the subject, which is "Talent borrows, genius steals," was etched into the vinyl runout grooves of the lead-off single for the album. But conversely, the lyrics warn against appropriation and of a busybody with a big nose who knows, who'll trip you up and laugh when you fall. But elsewhere in the song, this stanza, all those people, all those lives, where are they now? With loves and hates and passions just like mine. They were born and then they lived and then they died. It seems so unfair. I want to cry. Is lifted virtually wholesale from this 1939 play, The Man Who Came to Dinner. All those people, all those lives, where are they now? Here was a woman like myself, a woman who once lived and loved, full of the same passions, fears, jealousies, hates. I want to cry. So my project collects examples of these source lines and arranges them using the original page numbers and facsimile reprints of the pages in sequential order. So if the line appears on page 45 in the original book, it has to appear as page 45 in my book. Sometimes I'd have to buy multiple copies of the same book in the hopes that maybe the introduction was a little longer in this edition, and it would bump the pages down a few to a page that I still required. It's kind of like odd detective work and puzzle piecing at the same time. And it took about 5 years to complete. And this is a rare piece that I don't think I'm going to return to. Pop quiz is obviously also about pop lyrics and could be seen too as a kind of supercut. The lyrics are typeset or written in the book version rather than obviously appearing as audio. But it's another piece in which I'm collecting information and assembling it rather than producing something new. It was originally intended as a bookwork, which I couldn't afford to make at the time, so it became a video, which I now think of as the definitive version. It's been shown around the country a few different times, and it's, like most of the projects, updated each time. It was originally 12 or 15 minutes long, and the version I have on this laptop is already that much longer than the versions over there. So I think that's about 3 hours and 34 minutes, and I was working on the plane, and it's now, like, I think just about 4 hours. Someone asked me last night, who I think is here, if I would have ever sort of imagined anybody sitting and watching it in its entirety, which is something that I haven't even done. I think of it more of a piece that you can sort of dip into or glance at, or maybe you will be passing by on your way to class. I view it sort of as portraiture in a way, or kind of like a Venn diagram of where my listening habits might converge with the listening habits of the viewer. So the questions would sort of be pondered as this strange questionnaire, unless you happen to also have the song, own the song, or you've heard the song on the radio or Spotify or in a movie, in which case you might leave the gallery with some unexpected earworm, with the song bouncing around your head for a while. I would say the closest companion work to Pop Quiz is a piece commissioned by Toronto's Power Plant Gallery for their 25th anniversary a couple of years ago, called Is It What It Is? And Other Questions. And the project involved spending a few weeks in their dusty little archives room and resulted in 3 different works, one of which was an LED sign featuring 1,000 questions taken from documents in their dusty banker's boxes of material, most of which should probably be thrown away. Things like VCR manuals and printed emails from 40 years ago. The questions came from letters, contracts, interviews, reviews, transcribed panel discussions, class group discussions, guest book entries, and so on. And then rather than exhibit the work in one of the gallery spaces, I wanted it to kind of commingle with the promotional signage at the front desk. Some of the questions would make sense there, things like, are you a member? But others that appeared on the sign would be slightly unusual as introductory messages. I think of it sort of like a worthy pursuit to ask ourselves the same questions that we might ask students, for example. Young students might be asked, why look at animals, or what do you think the color red means? Or to ask questions of curators that they may ask of artists, and vice versa. Who owns the work to be exhibited was almost certainly just from a contract or an insurance form. But I think removed from that context, it kind of almost becomes a question of institutional critique with wide-ranging connotations regarding culture and commerce, not dissimilarly to this one. The question, is the art world ageist, is almost exclusively asked only of the very young or the very old, with the answer almost a foregone conclusion. But to me, the relevance stretches beyond those most adversely affected by it. Will there be a dinner was my favorite one, but I don't have a picture of it, because that's what everybody really wants to know. So another commissioned research piece, this 4-volume bookwork was made when I was invited to make a work in response to a hotel in Kitchener called the Walper Hotel. And there was something about the place that was just like a little bit too creepy. So rather than respond to their archives, I kind of rushed to finish this piece that I was already in the middle of working on, which sort of asked the question, is there a movie that has been so thoroughly dissected that every frame has been fully scrutinized? And the answer, of course, is yes, and it's The Shining. So the book contains every single frame from the film, accompanied by found commentary, mostly by truly obsessed fans who have very unusual relationships to the movie. This is one of those examples that I meant earlier when I talked about like what happens to culture after the fact, how it gets mutated and remixed, and how people live with it, interact with it, how it can almost even form communities in some instances. So these like hardcore fans, they would count the number of frames in between a cut. They would count the letters in the mailboxes that we see there. And all of those were considered clues, important clues, rather than just random information. They felt that Stanley Kubrick, the director, was trying to tell them something, and they were going to find out what that was. So one of the stranger and more popular conspiracy theories surrounding the film is that Kubrick had helped the US government fake the Apollo 11 moon landing, and that The Shining was his confession to the world. Danny's sweater is the most frequently cited clue, but there are many others, including, oddly enough, a painting by your own Alex Colville called The Moon and the Cow, which is one of a few of Colville's works that appear in the movie. Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. Oddly, there are many Canadian artworks included in the film, including a rare advertisement for Ingrid and Ian Baxter's Anything Company. They had a restaurant called Ice Cream, and it appears, you would like never know this on a VHS example, like it would take the Blu-ray for anybody to discover this. It appears on this bulletin board, like a weirdo conceptual art ice cream store in Vancouver makes its way into the movie The Shining. There's the short-lived ice cream store, and I imagine that's the ad that they used. There's like half a dozen threads on fan boards trying to determine exactly what these two words mean, because they can see ice cream, but they can't see the details. So unless you recognize the font and know the history of this little conceptual art collective from the 60s, you're going to have no idea. They also ask what the significance of the movie playing on this television set is, and how, in fact, the movie is being watched, because there's no cord coming from out of the TV and no electrical outlet. They wonder why the books on this windowsill are seen standing here, but in this cutaway shot they've fallen, and we have not heard the sound of them falling, and no one has remarked on the fact that they have fallen. In this scene, if you look at the clock, it's like very close, like maybe an inch away from the cable that's running to the ceiling. And later in the film, it has been moved to about a foot away. So Kubrick was known to be a perfectionist and thought by his fan base to be, a bona fide genius, and geniuses don't make mistakes, and therefore they reasoned that everything must be deliberate. This is a production Polaroid from the continuity crew, indicating that somebody was paying attention to all of these little details. So why did the clock move? Also, if you note the short wall behind Shelley Duvall's head, there are no light switches. Earlier in the film, there are two. When Jack goes for his interview at the beginning of the movie, there's no light switch here. Later on, one has appeared. So my work consisted of the 4 volumes that were just left in the lobby to be read by visitors of the hotel. But I also included a few little continuity errors spread throughout the space. So I had this lenticular image produced that resembled a mirror, and depending on where you would stand, it would reflect back the hotel in different ways. So sometimes the books would be standing like that other image, and other times they would be fallen. But if you were just standing at the elevator, you would imagine that you were seeing a mirror, not a lenticular photograph. And then a series of light switches, I took them, unscrewed them, and added magnets to them so that they could just be moved around by the cleaning crew over the 2-month duration of the exhibition. So you might be staying at the hotel and come home drunk, put your key in the door, and you recognize that there's a light switch that wasn't there the day before and won't be there tomorrow. The addendum to the Tommy Westphall universe is based on a web meme about the critically acclaimed and fairly popular hospital drama St. Elsewhere, which ran for 6 seasons in the 1980s. And then in the series finale, it's suggested that the entire 6 years of the show had all taken place in the imagination of an autistic boy named Tommy Westphall. and that his father, rather than being a doctor, was a blue-collar worker, and the hospital that we see in the series is just a model in his snow globe. So it's clearly designed as one of those sort of water cooler moments, like the going viral of the 80s. The "It's All a Dream" ending ended up sort of perplexing and angering most of the viewers. But many years later, fans and other TV obsessives noted that the characters of St. Elsewhere had actually interacted with the characters from the sitcom Cheers. So Dr. Westfall, Tommy's dad, drinks with a colleague inside the bar Cheers. He meets Carla, the waitress. Cheers regular Norm Peterson turns out is the doctor's accountant. Here, Norm Peterson meets characters from the spin-off show from Cheers, Frasier, who are here met by Cliff, also from Cheers. Here, Frasier and his wife Lilith meet the cast of a show called Wings. So the premise goes that if Tommy Westfall dreamt St. Elsewhere, he must have also dreamt Wings, Cheers, Frasier, and other shows that sort of spin off or cross over. For example, Richard Belzer portrayed Detective Munch on Homicide, a show that has another connection to St. Elsewhere. And he also played the character here in Law & Order, here on The Wire, just seen in the background of a bar without a speaking part, here on The X-Files, here on 30 Rock, on Arrested Development, named as such, and even on Sesame Street. So these shows allow links to dozens of others, and the original Tommy Westfall universe collected about 300 shows that ostensibly only existed in this little boy's imagination. So my piece sort of expands on the parameters of the original, just like changes the rules a little bit to include animation and children's programs, which then link back to other live action shows, allowing me to more than double the content of the original. I was able to track down about 300 plus more shows. And so the work is presented as a wall drawing, which includes the new series as well as some of the original ones necessary to ensnare them. For example, Homer Simpson visits the Cheers bar, where several original cast members reprise their roles. Kiefer Sutherland appears as his character from 24. A few years ago, The Simpsons, Family Guy, and Bob's Burgers all appear in a crossover episode. David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson reprise their roles as the FBI agents from The X-Files on The Simpsons and another show called Eek the Cat. The Three Stooges meet Scooby-Doo. The Power Rangers meet the Ninja Turtles. H.R. Pufnstuf appears on Chips. The Flintstones meet both the Jetsons and Bewitched, despite the shows taking place in the past, future, and present, respectively. Urkel meets everyone. Happy Days spins off Mork and Mindy with Robin Williams, etc., etc., etc. So the rule for inclusion in the original Westfall universe is that the same actor must perform the same role. The expanded universe allows for sort of other fictional entities to connect the series. This is the last minute of the last ever episode of Married with Children, with Ed O'Neill playing Al Bundy for the final time after 259 episodes. 12 years later, the actor O'Neill portrayed Jay Pritchard in Modern Family, seen here reading the exact same newspaper. Here's Louis C.K. reading that newspaper in an episode of Lucky Louie, and it appears in about a dozen other TV shows and even a few feature films. I think it's in a Coen Brothers movie, but I didn't include films in my project. So I tracked down a copy of that newspaper, and it appears in a vitrine next to the drawing, alongside a bookwork that explains every connection that features on the drawing, and then a pack of fictional Morley cigarettes, which were made famous in The X-Files. but could actually be traced back as far as Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. The National Tatler is a fictional newspaper that only appears in Married with Children, but this is a still from a different project, a bookwork called No Expectations. Which collects images from television shows, feature films, and even the occasional music video, in which the actresses are pregnant, but the characters are not. So their growing bellies are hidden by increasingly strange series of props and scenarios. The corpse is pregnant there. It's a little person hiding Elaine in Seinfeld, along with a very big oversized sweater. And the work was made for a show that coupled sculptors with bookmakers. So it's partly about viewing sculpture in its most base form, putting things on top of other things. But it was also about Verfremdungseffekt, a German term coined by Bertolt Brecht that translates to distancing or estrangement effect, essentially theatrical distancing, the actor at odds with the character. It led to some strange costumes. This is a bubble wrap suit from Doctor Who, but also to the reintroduction of domestic chores that are sort of rarely seen on television, such as laundry, and dry cleaning, and putting away of the groceries. And in fact, an entire kitchen counter was made in this season of The Cosby Show to mask the lead actress's pregnancy. Here she's sewing, or sitting with, I think she's sewing, but she has a stuffed animal in front of her that nobody comments on. Like, it's unheard of on television for someone to walk in and there's like a life-size stuffed animal and no one says, "What's going on?" In this scene from Cheers, again, both actresses are pregnant. The character of Carla, considered promiscuous and fertile, can accommodate the plot change written by real life, but the character of Diane, who's in a kind of like will they, won't they with Sam Malone, cannot, so her actress hides behind the bar and her serving tray. And the book is entirely image-based, but The Dust Jacket tells a few other stories about the way that pregnancy's been handled by network television over the years. This bookwork is a remake of a classic Ed Ruscha book from 1966 called Every Building on the Sunset Strip. And it replaces his photographs of every building on the 2.4, I think it is, kilometer strip of Sunset Boulevard with text, with histories, stories about the properties and their history. Many of them are banal, like this place used to be a shoe store and now it's a pizzeria. But a number of them talk about the kind of mob activity and movie star interaction that took place. For example, this liquor store owner is best known for an event when he was a private detective, which involved the most famous actress of all time, the most famous singer of the time, and perhaps the best-known baseball player of all time. Marilyn Monroe was divorcing her husband, baseball legend Joe DiMaggio, and after seeing her car parked outside an apartment near Melrose and Crescent Heights and suspecting her of infidelities, DiMaggio hired the owner of this liquor store to orchestrate a raid on her apartment. At 11 p.m., the two men, and Frank Sinatra, battered down the door with an axe, breaking glass and tearing it from its hinges. A Mrs. Florence Ross, a 39-year-old single secretary who lived alone, was fast asleep inside. And Monroe was next door, visiting her friend Sheila. The incident and subsequent lawsuit became known as the Wrong Door Raid. So the book is also available in this box set, which includes another remake of the book, which is 50 prints, coupling Ruscha's photographs of the strip with scenes from movies or televisions of the exact same location. So there's the liquor store as it appeared in Ed Ruscha's photograph, and then as it appears in some B movie from the late 60s. Sometimes we see a different perspective of the building. Sometimes the framing is nearly exactly the same. We might have a different viewpoint. In some cases, the original building is gone, replaced by another, such as the famous Tower Records, which is itself now closed down. And whenever possible, I tried to emphasize the vantage of an automobile, as the impetus for the project came from a book called Zoomscape, whose central premise is ultimately that most of the architecture that we experience is either driving past it through the window of a car or a train, or through the screen, like on television or in a movie. And I started thinking about the two works as kind of a colorization and a novelization of Ed Ruscha's book. Both of those terms have extremely pejorative connotations, like coloring classic films is considered a bastardization, and novels based on movies are sort of hack work for most writers. But I kind of like the negative connotations personally. And this is the way that the piece was shown. And we're going to close on my favorite supercut, which is neither an artist video nor a fan-made YouTube sensation. It's a documentary by a film professor named Tom Anderson called Los Angeles Plays Itself, which looks at the way that the filmmaker's home city has been portrayed in Hollywood movies. I think it's still available on Netflix. It's about 3 hours long, and I would recommend watching it in parts because it contains a lot of information that's sort of best absorbed slowly. I'm currently working on just hopefully finishing up a response version, or kind of an inversion, to his piece called Dead Ringer, which will feature scenes filmed in my hometown of Toronto, but particularly scenes in which Toronto is the location, but not the setting. So Toronto is the fourth most seen city in feature films after Los Angeles, New York, and London, but virtually never as itself. The skyline is typically carefully clipped to not include the CN Tower. Our own filmmakers' works are very rarely seen. Even Canadian TV shows go to great length to take a kind of North Generica, it's been called, approach, rarely identifying the location and avoiding Canadian currency, for example, which apparently angers American viewers. So ultimately, the work kind of asks the question, like, what does it mean to see your city reflected back to you, but not your experience? And some of the more specific questions might be, do the students at the University of Toronto downtown campus, which is often used as a stand-in for Harvard, Yale, and other Ivy League schools, do they view their institution differently than those attending at the Scarborough campus, whose brutalist architecture is routinely used to portray an oppressive dystopian future in science fiction films? It features local landmarks that have been repurposed, such as Roy Thompson Hall, which becomes another futuristic location in science fiction films such as The X-Men or the TV series The Strain, or the disused Hearn generating station, seen here with Henry Rollins, has been repurposed as the evil corporation Toxico. It's been a brewery. It's a laboratory. It's Wilson Steele from the horror film franchise Saw, where the killer Jigsaw lives. A dilapidated warehouse in 12 Monkeys. A futuristic work for rations site in the film Pacific Rim. And countless other uses. This one has superimposed mountains in the background. I think it's RoboCop. The R.C. Harris water treatment plant in the east end of Toronto appears as an asylum, as an evil headquarters, also on a mountain, and as many, many prisons. And another brewery blown up. The work will obviously sort of attempt to address larger concerns surrounding national and cultural identities, but it'll also maybe examine my own relationship with the city that I live in. You know, Pop Quiz has elements of self-portraiture, but I don't think I've ever used autobiography in my work, but it seems a little inevitable here. This is the hospital where I was born. This is my high school in a horror film called The Brain. This is a record store where I worked. This is the church where Rula and I were married in some like hip hop dance movie. This is my local grocery store, like 2 minutes from my house, here with a SWAT team and Lawrence Fishburne from the show Hannibal. This is my bank. This is my bank being blown up. This is virtually an identical view from my bedroom window, as seen in a little small budget feature film. This clip purports clearly to take place in Harlem, in Manhattan, but is in fact from Toronto's Junction neighborhood. And if you go to Google Street Image, which I often use to trace down some of these pieces of information, you actually see the episode being filmed. This is when the Google truck drove by. It's one of those kind of strange research moments. The project, which is like in super slow motion, has already spun off about 3 or 4 other pieces, including this work, which is a 10 to 12-minute narrative that tells a story of a hostage taking and a big shootout at the Hearn, entirely retold using clips from movies filmed there. A newspaper project that kind of connects cinema and trains with a focus on the Toronto subway system, or Toronto subway station that was only operational for about 6 months, almost 50 years ago, called Bay Lower or Lower Bay. And after years of trying, I finally convinced the city to let me in for an afternoon to take some pictures. It's kind of a ghost station. It looks mostly abandoned, but it's still used periodically to train TTC staff or to try out new floor tiles and things like that. Occasionally they'll host a party there. But it's mostly used as a filming location because it's difficult to shoot in active subways because you're going to interrupt commuters on their way to their work and their lives. So countless productions have been shot here. There's Mos Def and Bruce Willis. There's Keanu Reeves, I think, in The Matrix. There's the Olsen twins having a little kung fu fight. There's Mira Sorvino in Mimic. And other films include Repo Man, Total Recall, Resident Evil, and so on and so on. The site has its own little prop room. It's outfitted with signs that'll transform the platform into any number of American cities. So the newspaper reproduces some of the photos that I took of the station alongside stills from these movies and was distributed free from this artist newsstand that Jess Dobkin ran for about a year at her own expense out of Chester Station, which is a pretty brilliant project. And I thought of it as a kind of like site-specific writing, reading about trains while on a train, but also it was sequenced in such a way that by the time you began to read about Bay Lower Station, you'd be driving just underneath it. Another offshoot was a poster commissioned by C Magazine for a series that they were distributing at another station, Union Station. On the back was another text to be read by commuters, and the front is an image from the 1976 Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder movie called Silver Streak. And the title of this piece is Los Angeles as Toronto as Chicago, as the scenes take place in Chicago, but was filmed in Los Angeles with a 1-to-1 replica of Toronto's Union Station built there. The text tells a variety of different stories, but one anecdote in particular summarized a number of concerns of the larger project and perhaps highlighted what it means to have your city's identity whitewashed from cinema, which is sort of the central question about the movie Dead Ringer. And it reads, Toronto's Union Station makes a brief appearance in the Oscar-winning musical Chicago, which, despite its moniker, was shot almost entirely in Toronto. The mayor of Chicago, Richard Daley, was reportedly a fan of the film, but was critical about runaway productions that received generous incentives from the Canadian governments. We do the creative work, he said. We do the financial work. Why should we send the production overseas? A spokesperson for Mr. Daley later said that the mayor was, quote, certainly aware that Canada is not, in fact, overseas. So I think that's as good a place as any to end, but if I haven't, I have overtalked my 45 minutes, I knew I would. But I can answer questions or... Right, I watched almost none of, I mean, I watched Night of the Living Dead countless times, and it's actually a film, I'd never seen it before, just probably dismissed it as a sort of cheap, useless B movie, but it's kind of fucking brilliant. It's like a really good movie that holds up 50 years later. It's like shot on $100,000 budget or something. Really good cast, really good acting. I mean, every genre movie that follows it owes a debt to that film. So I watched it many times, but almost all of the pieces of movies that reappear in my project, I didn't watch those movies. They're probably terrible or bad TV shows or whatever. So I would research them online and then find them, download them, and sort of scrub through them until I got to the scene that I needed. I used IMDb, I used film script sites, but I would also just, like the reason the film's called Watching Night of the Living Dead is that was my most common search term. Like the characters are watching Night of the Living Dead, or watching Night of the Living Dead on TV, or watching Night of the Living Dead at the drive-in, or watching Night of the Living Dead, etc. It's like insane, obsessive, compulsive research. As I say, I thought it would take like 10 years to make, and it just turns out that there's 3 or 4 films that I know that are coming out. There's a movie that played at a film festival called The Parting Glass. I check every day to see if that movie's been released. Has not yet, almost a year later, but it has a clip. I mean, most of them have the same clip. They have their Coming to Get You, Barbara. So like I go through all the trouble, I download it, I find it, I script through it, and it's like, oh, I have that movie 25 times. I don't need it anymore. But occasionally, you see a character watching a scene that I have underrepresented or something. So I sort of hoped that having it come out on Blu-ray would lead me to put it to bed and not still update it. But I'm going to still update it, I suspect. Does that also answer your question, Chris?
No, I have so many questions.
Okay. Save some for dinner tonight. but let's go with the one that the larger room may have some interest in. Well, Pop Quiz sort of maybe didn't precede it happening, but it preceded, me from having high broadband or something. And the first supercut I ever did was called, I think I showed a still of the VHS tape, it's called Belly Buttons Need Love 2. And I would go behind the curtain in my local little video store into the porn section and rent every porn movie that they had there, and then point my camera at the belly buttons. And then you would just sort of see this highly pixelized, because that was when TVs, had big pixels, and it just sort of looked like a UFO bouncing around the screen. And then the soundtrack, anybody who came to visit me, I put a live guitar cable into their belly button, and if you've ever touched your finger, which happened earlier today when we were putting music on, if you ever touched your finger to a live cable, it makes pops and cracks and hisses and so on. So that was the soundtrack to this 60-minute piece, but it was made with maybe not even 2 VCRs, like 1 VCR and a camera. And I would literally, I could say, now I'm up to 40 minutes, now I'm up to 42 minutes, now I'm up, and I would just add the clips. There was no editing. As soon as a new piece became available, I would add to it. So no research other than the humiliation of seeming like an insane pervert at my local video store, or at least a compulsive masturbator. So those are the 2 examples. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of talk about post-internet work. I'm drawing a blank of the Montreal artist who uses Google Street View to great effect. Hey, what's his name? John Raffman, is that it? Sorry. There's a lot of shows that kind of look at that, and I'm not in those shows, but I feel like my work would not exist. My work is 100%. Without Google, I couldn't go to the library. Or maybe that Sgt. Pepper piece that I showed as framed photographs, that was done when I was on a Banff residency, and at least began using library books that I would have scanned. And maybe the Wi-Fi there was poor or something. I do remember writing to some friends and saying, can you go and get me this book, or can you search for this? But it would be impossible. That's when it would be a lifelong project. Absolutely. If people don't know the Richer book, it's kind of considered ground zero for artist books. They sold for $1 at the time, but if you try to buy a copy of the first edition, good luck getting it without spending $20,000. But the way that he made that book was he went at 5 o'clock in the morning, as soon as the sun rose, put a tripod on the back of his truck, drove a foot took a picture of a building, drove afoot, took a picture of a building. Like they were, his photography is now celebrated for being the antithesis of the type of photography that was celebrated at the time, which was really, evocative and emotional, and his were just really matter of fact. Like he just wanted the picture of a building. He didn't want, an eagle swooping by, or nothing touching, nothing sentimental, nothing. He wasn't trying to capture that magic moment. He was just using it as like a document. And so he drove up down one side of the street, and the book is an accordion fold, and there's a strip that runs all the way through it. That's the north side of the street, or the west, whichever it is. And then you turn the book upside down, and there's the other half. And it's literally just every single image from the book, from the street. And people have now started to, as you're alluding to identify this book as prescient in terms of Google Earth. Like he was the original version of the car that drove around and took pictures of it took invasive photographs of your home while you're doing some gardening on the front lawn. All the time, yeah. Like that's why I don't care. Like if I download a movie, and it might just be the Coming to Get You Barbara scene, because it might be a higher res image. It might show the television set better. It might show, I don't know, somebody, a more interesting actor watching the piece. Or, yeah, they're updated all the time. I also like a lot of the clips that I showed here. If I just showed a still, some of those don't appear in the film. A different, I have the two, so I might as well show you a different one. I think I showed an image of the box of Timeline. And it comes with a book called Another 20th Century, I think, which is just a title card from a Terry Gilliam film. And so the bookwork that accompanies the DVD has 1900, 1901, 1902, all the way up to 1999, and they're all scenes that don't appear in the film. So it's kind of like a bookwork as, DVD Easter egg or something. Like I have 1944, if anyone's curious, is by far the most represented year in cinematic history. I could make a movie just of 1944. I probably have like 100 examples of films that begin with August 1944, or Poland 1944, or Berlin 1944, and they're not all you think of them as being primarily World War II related, but I think I have Johnny Cash being born in 1944 in a barn somewhere in Wyoming, or I'm making these details up, but along those lines. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily. Obviously, it's not my favorite. Like I'd much rather find the clip that I need than the clip that I already have. But yeah, I'm happy to swap them out periodically. Yeah, there's you can turn the page enough times. I'm thinking of sort of redoing that. I really like Douglas Gordon's 24-Hour Psycho, so I'm thinking of making 24-Hour Shining, parenthesis, audio commentary. So it'll be a 24, like normally the director will talk about his movie for the 90 minutes that it's on, or if there are fan commentaries that would last as long as the film. So the question is, and I'm not sure why I beat myself up with these things, but can I talk for 24 hours in the voice of these mad commentators to accompany a film? Maybe I'll just do like the first hour or something, which would be like the first 5 minutes of the movie slowed down to last an hour. And then I would point out stupid things like the mountains look like a letter A. The letter A means Apollo moonlight, like all the dumb things. Like they've literally, like, I showed you a very small sampling of, like, some of them is pretty compelling. Like, there are some weird continuity errors that you wouldn't imagine would happen naturally. But they've extrapolated that into so many theories. Or I just even to search, because I threw this thing together a couple of days ago in my nice Airbnb. And I didn't have that picture of the Alex Colville. And I'm like, I cannot show Alex Colville in Sackville. So I had to re-download the movie and find that scene. And while I was doing that, I discovered a more recent conspiracy theory, which is the Disney movie Frozen is a remake of Shining. Look it up if you're bored later. Yeah. I don't know if that'll factor in, like if it kind of posthumous, like, I don't know. We'll see. But if I've got to talk for 24 hours, I'll probably be talking about Frozen. It's true. Thank you for asking. Why, yes, I do. Let's see, yeah. Let's see if I can get to it. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with the residency, which I now sort of administer, so I would advise you all to consider applying. It's like the best 3 months I ever spent in my life. The Scotch company Glenfiddich hosts a residency in which they fly 8 artists from around the world to northern Scotland, where you live in a nice little cottage for 3 months. I think you're paid like $10,000 or whatever it was. It was more than I earned as the director of an art gallery in Toronto, so I promptly quit my job. And you're given a large production budget and as much whiskey as you could possibly fathom. Like you arrive and there's like a bottle of 12, 15, and 18-year-old on your kitchen counter waiting for you. And now it's an application process. At the time, I did it 10 years ago, last summer, and I'd never even heard of the residency. I just get an email saying, we would like to invite you and pay you all of this money. And like there was a contract that said you will have a bicycle. I'm like, this, really, I'm quitting my job. So you go there, and you have 3 months to make a work. And so because I didn't apply, it was invited, they just kind of say, we'd like to have a sense of what you might do. So I quickly scrambled to think of what I might do for 3 months in North Scotland. And I discovered this composer who had spent 10 years to make maybe a 90-minute orchestrated piece or something in the 50s. And I thought that I would try to take 90 minutes to make a 10, I would flip that around and try and make this like really slowed down piece of music. And I proposed that and they said yes, because they ultimately just want to make sure you're not going to go there and just fart around, swim in the Loch Ness Lake or something. And then as soon as I got there, I realized I don't want to be stuck in my bedroom, working on the computer. I could do that at home. I want to do something different. So, because you would visit places like this, these are the massive stills. These are things I pulled out of a previous presentation because it didn't seem to fit. I can't even remember what these things are called. But when I was there, I decided that I don't want they have a little gallery. So one of the deals is that you could make as much work as, let's say you're a painter and you go and you paint 20 paintings while you're there. They just want you to leave 1 or 2 behind so that they have something in their collection, something for their visitor center, something for their little art gallery. But when I was toured around, this is like one of 21 warehouses that they have. And it kind of felt like that scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark at the end where, they put the Ark in this massive warehouse and pull out. It's just endless barrels of whiskey, some of which have been there for 30, even 50 years, which, are only for the wealthiest dignitaries to visit to ever get a little sip of, because it's probably like $100 a sip. And I thought, I don't want to be in the visitor center of the art gallery. I want to be in this fucking room. This is the room to be in. So I thought of a piece in which I would produce my own whiskey, but rather than the 12, 18, 21, maybe 32 is kind of, I think, the highest level that you could get in stores, and that's very, very expensive. I would make 100-year whiskey, sell it now, sell an empty box of it now, and you get it 100 years later when you're dead, and when I'm dead. So we had to make like a special reinforced barrel because a lot of whiskey, like 2% a year evaporates. So theoretically, after 100 years, that's all of the whiskey gone, except it's actually 2% of the remaining. So I did the math somewhere in an Excel sheet. So I would still have maybe just enough, but we tried all these other tricks to ensure that there'll be whiskey in 100 years' time. So we build like bigger reinforced barrels. These are I say we, I mean they're amazing staff there. I did fuck all. And then maybe this is a picture that I showed at the beginning. So it's buried for 100 years. The plan is for people who work there now to know where it is and be able to show people, but gradually it kind of becomes a rumor and this legend, and then in 100 years' time, the people that have bought it, and it was the only way that it really ties to my other practice is that I sort of feel like it's about, again, this way that the culture is given a value. So I took 15 of the bottles, the distillery took 15, and I sort of wanted to see who could sell them faster. Like as an artwork, are they more valuable, or as a whiskey, are they more valuable? And my dealer sold most of our copies. I think there's maybe 2 left of the 15. And whenever I check with Andy, he's always like, we got 100 years, we're in no rush. So I don't think they're really even trying to sell it. which is fine by me. The most important thing was that it's an edition of 25 plus one artist proof, as they say, because I want my own. And so it got buried, and to bury whiskey, you have to fight with various like Scottish whiskey boards. I had to prove that there was another example of a whiskey that had been buried, and because there wasn't, we officially can't call it whiskey. We have to call it spirit from the distillery. Even better, I'm happy to call it spirit. I made a little time capsule of its production, so when it gets dug, when people when the buyers send in their contracts in literally 90 years from now, and say, hey, you guys, you owe me some whiskey. These people will, the box comes with a sealed map as well, so the people who buy it can know. So it comes in this nice little wooden crate. It's called A Drink to Us When We're Both Dead. But I also like the idea of selling for a couple $1,000s an empty box. It just feels funny to me. And so this larger box that houses it also has the contract, because I had to convince, it almost seems like one of those things that Glenn Fiddick would love, that I went and made a work about whiskey, which is not my intention at all. And if I was invited by Coca-Cola or something to make a work about Coke, I would have to say, I don't know how to do that. This was a sort of a fluke. And in fact, I had to convince the lawyers to let me do it, because they thought, no. I was forwarded by accident an email that said, shut this down. We can't, don't let him do this. And I had to get on the phone with lawyers from London, and eventually I kind of realized that they get it more than anybody, because a lawyer's job is to imagine every possible outcome. I remember reading in the 70s that there were reading about the 70s, that there were contracts that, Prince would sign a record contract that says, we own the rights to distribute your songs throughout the world and the known universe. They were imagining a future time, and they have been for 50 years, in which they might sell records on the moon, and they want to make sure they have the legal rights to that. So in a way, they totally get it, and questions about so there's one of the lines is, if prohibition comes into effect, then what does that mean to the buyer? And that seems ridiculous, but it's 100 years from now. We had prohibition 100 years ago. We could have prohibition again, and so on and so on. There's a little diary, and I don't know if there's a picture, there's a map that comes with it, so that the buyer can send it away. So that's a very long answer to your question, and thank you for asking it. Yeah. And I suppose some of the other things, I'm not going to be here to be a steward of those works, so it's a little bit harder. This I could just leave for somebody else to contend with, but yeah, I think I've got probably half a dozen works that I'll never feel are finalized. Speaking of finalized, why don't we end that here? Thank you very much for coming, and I'll be around if anyone has other questions. But cheers.